Okay, so it's lesson 11, part 2. We've set up we have our Express API running. Rob had asked a question about how do I get my JSON nicely formatted here in Firefox. So the way I did it, I actually added this extension called the REST client. There's similar extensions for Chrome or other browsers. So it still allows me to see the raw data. So without the REST client, this is what I get when I call the API. That's probably what you're seeing. If you install a REST client in your browser, it nicely formats your JSON for you. So there's a similar extension in Chrome. I have one in Chrome, so if we looked at the extension, yeah, I have this REST. This is called restless client in Chrome, so I would get a similar result displayed in Chrome. Except it doesn't seem to be working. It's enabled, so it's kind of interesting the client's not there.
You need to hit the extension tab up on the top right. Next to the...
Oh, yeah. Whoops, it put it right here. So in Chrome, thank you, Ryan. I forgot I installed it so long ago. If I just hit this, it gives me this window. So I can just run any kind of HTTP request. So I can run a GET method on my localhost 3000 cars and send the request, and here I get the body. So I can collapse that window. You can install a tool like this in Chrome. I find the Firefox one is a little simpler. But here you just click it and it enables it. Okay. So what we want to do, we have Angular built out this client-side component. We don't really want to use it. We want to make a cars component instead and render that. So we're going to work on this layer, the component layer, and then we'll need to get it to talk to our service. I'll just close this down for a minute. So we'll go into our client folder. And in here, I'm going to make a directory called components. Now, the version that the kind of Angular generator uses, it only has the component layer. It has no service layer. It's just a component in HTML. Because we're going to have both a component and a service, we want to store those in separate folders so it's a little cleaner, because we wind up with a lot of files. So much like we've divided our front end and back end into our server and client folders, we're now dividing our client into the components and the services. So the components talk to the HTML and the services talk to the server API. So in here, we'll make a new TypeScript file. So if we just kind of look at what's here, we've got, sorry, I wanted this inside of source. So I'm going to drag this. It should be inside of client and source. So inside of component, I'm going to make a new TypeScript file. So we're going to call it car.component.ts. So here's our app component. Our car component is going to be fairly similar. We're going to import the component library from the Angular core. So I'll just use WebStorm to auto-complete that. So our component is going to have a selector. So this is the self-defined HTML tag that allows us to insert or inject this component into an HTML page. So here it was called app root. What would be a good descriptor for this component? Yeah, or we could just call it car, right? So we can define a car tag and inject that into an HTML page. So selector will be car. And then we want a template URL. So this will be our template URL will be car.component.html. And I'm missing round brackets around this whole thing. That's why my editor is complaining. We're creating a component with a selector of car, so we can insert that a car tag in our HTML. And we'll use this template. We'll create a car.component.html file. We want to make it public. And we'll export this component. So now we need to make this car component.html. So in here, I'm going to make a new HTML file called car.component. We don't need to give it an extension. WebStorm will automatically assign the HTML5 extension. Now, this is only a part of a page, so we won't need any header or footer. We're going to inject this into our index.html. So all of this stuff, it can come out. We can just put on a heading here. This car tracker. So we'll put on, in a minute, we'll put on our table. Actually, you know what? We'll do it here. Rather than hard code it. Actually, sorry. We'll leave it like that. So there's our component HTML. So now on our index page, we want to do a few things. Let's change the title from client we'll call it Car Tracker SPA. So notice automatically my title in my browser changes. And then instead of our app root, let's render our car component instead. So let's just see what's. We may have to make a couple other changes. So in index.html, let's try and inject our car component instead. We don't want to show the Angular template page. We want our own car page to show up. Now our car tag is here. Notice our page title actually, let's just try one thing here. Sorry, I'll go to our car component. Let's put in a title here. See if we can render that in our. We'll use our little handlebar mustache tags. Okay, we're getting a 404 error. It's trying to find the favorite icon in client and views. So let's change our app.js here. To just be. If that fixes our problem. Yeah, so that path is okay. So I've uncommented line 23. It's now looking for the favorite icon inside of client source. So we've written our TypeScript, but it's not actually been compiled yet. So our component isn't showing anything yet. So we have to transpile that. Okay, so I'll try this for a second. I'll go to TypeScript. So in my WebStorm, I'm going to click compile. So I've clicked on my little TypeScript tab here. We're going to try to compile, and we'll see what happens. So I want to compile my car component.ts. Obviously, I'm missing something. Bear with me for a second. Let's see what happens if I compile all. If I haven't got any errors, that's good. I think I've just missed a step. Let's just see. What did we miss? We could have just done this all in the app component, but we're best off to create our own component. I'll just check my GitHub repository. So our TypeScript compiler should auto-generate a JS file. Last year we did a game library, as well as this mapping file. Okay, I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to stop my server for a minute. I'm going to run the command tsc. I'll see if this does it, which is the TypeScript compiler. Okay. So we got some errors trying to compile. Why? Oh, it may have to do with this RxJS library. So notice it's added this. The compiler tried to add this. I think it's a configuration problem. We need to add another reference in here. I think that's what I've missed. Bear with me for a second. Cool. Okay, here's one thing we do need to add. We need to add our component into our app.module.ts. So that's in here in our source and app. We should be importing our car component. So we definitely need this reference. When I start typing it, WebStorm completes it for me. So this file, this app.module.ts, this is like the Angular configuration file. It's like app.js on the server side. So if we want to use any components, we need to register them here. And then in here, we need to add it to this list. So our site uses our app component, and it also uses our car component. So this is kind of similar to what we do in app.js with referencing a controller. We make a reference and we declare it. There are also a few other modules that we need that I neglected. We need to make a few other references here in our Angular app. We also need Angular's browser, HTTP, and eventually we're going to need the forms module so we can include a form and process it. We want Angular's HTTP module, and Angular's form module, and we're going to add those in here. So it's telling us that one's going to run my TypeScript compiler again. No errors, which is encouraging. I'll try and run my TypeScript compiler again. Just see what else I might have missed. That one looks okay. Well, maybe we need to check our TypeScript. Just check a couple things with my TypeScript declaration. Our TypeScript configuration is using ES 2015, which is good. Okay, while I mull this over, we can also in here add Bootstrap. We may as well add this. So under assets, we can add a CSS directory here. We can add our Bootstrap style sheet from our previous card tracker from public and style sheets. I'll just copy everything here. Go back to client, source, assets, and CSS. And we can add Bootstrap to our index.html. So at index, we can add it here. So we can go to assets. So this should add Bootstrap for us. I've taken my server offline, so I better just start it again. With ng-serve. Should at least add our style sheet. I know we haven't totally fixed our TypeScript compilation problem yet. Still building. In order to see it, I may need to put back my index to just load the original component for now. Yeah, it's still blank. So I'll maybe just go back to my index just for a minute, change this back to my app root tag. At least it will load the original. Should load the original page now, but we've applied Bootstrap to it. Right, so we can see the change in CSS. Here. I'm going to try my TypeScript compiler one more time while this runs in my client. So this is an R file. One of the Angular files is not compiling for us. Okay, well, we have next week's class, so the goal is to do as much of this as we can. I apologize for not wasn't prepared for that error. I've not seen that one before. So I'm going to have to spend a little time on figuring out how to correct it. So we have our backend mostly set up. We will need to change the rest of our controller methods. So there is one useful thing we can do now, and then I'll clean up this error and we'll resume it next week with building our component. In our car controller, we may as well, inside of server controllers, we may as well take out any calls to is logged in. We don't need this. We want to make our page, we want everything to be public. We're not going to have a login here. So any of the methods that call is logged in, you can simply remove that. We're not going to need this. In fact, I can even get rid of the reference to our functions file. It's just not necessary. So we'll take out any of the calls to the isLoggedIn function. We actually don't need our two get methods for add and edit. Sorry, we don't need one for add because we're not loading any form. We only will need a post method. So we can actually delete this method that says get cars add. All that does is display the user a form. So we don't need that. The form is going to be right in our front end on our single page application. That form will be visible all the time. So we just have our get, post, delete. Okay. So we'll save it. I will post our application as we have it so far to GitHub. So next week we'll resolve the issue I'm having with the component and the compilation. And then once I do that, we should be able to inject our cars back in. And the first thing we will do is then create a service that calls our get method and takes that JSON and then hands that JSON back to our component. And it gets injected into our form. So we want to display our list of cars in our HTML file. That'll be first. Then we'll look at adding a form to it, so that we can add a car, and if we have time, we can implement edit and delete next week. If we don't get all the CRUD operations done, not the end of the world. We'll do as much as we can in putting this together.